Thank you, Rachel. So it's now sort of my job to explain what the thing is that Rachel talked about. And the People, Power and Technology project, which is what the thing became when it got a name, essentially is looking at two things. So how much people understand about the technologies that they use day to day and what they feel about those technologies. And as a shortcut, the what they feel, the attitudes is the blue book, and the what they understand is the orange book. So those are the two pieces of work that I'll be talking about over the course of this afternoon. So in terms of why we felt this research was needed, for me, it centres a lot on this vision that Martha Lane Fox, who's our founder, articulated in her Dimbleby lecture in 2015, when she talked about the need for an organisation like Doteveryone. And it's about how can we shape a society and a world that is infused with technology through and through. And the sort of driving force behind this research is we can only shape a digital world if we can understand that world. And we can only shape a digital world if we know what we want. So those are the two things that really lay behind working out what digital understanding looks like and what digital attitudes are. So in terms of starting from what is digital understanding? And for us, it was really important to think about how people interact with technologies in their lives. And it's a very, very different thing depending on who you are, what stage you're at in your life, what your different needs are. So we felt like asking people, do you understand data? Was perhaps not a meaningful question to people. What does monetization mean to people? It's probably not going to take us very far. Even, what does privacy mean? Actually, in your day-to-day life, what does it mean? So instead we started thinking, what do people need in their lives, and thinking about the different roles we play. So if I'm going for my first job and I think about the impact of technologies on my life, it's really important that I'm aware that my employer is going to look at my social media profiles and infer stuff about me from that. If I'm on a limited budget, then it's really important that I'm aware that prices can be determined by the information that I've left behind through browsing. If I'm involved in a campaign, it's really important that I'm aware that the information I receive is filtered and that that's determined by the networks I'm in. So we started to think about these practical ways that people interact with technologies and what would be important and useful understanding for people to have. And then that led to us defining them into 4 roles. So in the top right there we have worker, over in the top left, individual, member of society in the middle, and consumer there at the bottom. And those are the 4 ways that we managed to sort of map out what digital understanding might mean. And so to give you an example of what that looks like when you break it down, thinking about consumers, why does a consumer need to understand technology? Well, because the internet is a market and they're going to need to make decisions about how they use and buy and sell products and services in their lives as a consumer. So it's a practical understanding that is going to help them negotiate those things. And having taken that overarching thing, we then break that down further into practical themes that people are going to need to be able to recognise. So, if you're a consumer, knowing that prices vary, knowing what might alert you to illegitimate companies, knowing what the business models are, knowing that you have rights. Those are all important ways that you can understand your life as a digital consumer. And so I won't go over blow by blow for each of the roles, but essentially we did that in each of the roles. And you'll find at the back of the orange report, all of that is laid out in sort of granular detail. And what's important about these varying arrows is that we don't all have to know all of this all of the time. The point is to know the stuff that is going to help you to harness technologies, take advantage of the opportunities at the moment that you need them, in the context that you need them. So it's not a kind of race to be won and you say, hooray, I am questioning in all 4 roles, hooray, I get a gold star. Do the stuff that is going to help you and don't worry about the stuff that isn't so important to you. And this is obviously, it's a huge piece of work. Alex, who's sitting there, was sort of a driving force behind it. We also benefited from input from a lot of people here and elsewhere. But it is the first attempt, so tell us what you think. You know, what have we missed? What needs to still be there? What's the most useful bit? Is there a part of life that is just totally not encapsulated in that? But we do think that this has the foundation of really being a useful sort of resource by which we can gauge the public's understanding and also keep the focus on the conversation around understanding, which is part of what we're focusing on ourselves. So that's the digital understanding model. And like I say, it's about what the individual needs. But what came out quite clearly across the research is there are problems overall. There's a sort of societal issue, and it's important not just to think about each individual and what they need, but when you start to see there's a pattern across the board that there are some pretty big gaps. And we've identified these as 5 digital blind spots. So the first of these is around advertising. And this came up a lot in the conversations we had in focus groups, that people found it essentially creepy. That was the thing that came up again. They feel disconcerted by it. It gives people a lack of control and also a sort of feeling of general suspicion. So when we talked about this in focus groups, people would start saying things like, you know, I didn't put anything on the computer. I didn't do anything, but my phone must have been listening to me because we were just in the office talking about cake, and then all of a sudden, here are adverts for birthday cakes coming up on my timeline. So it gives this a terrible sense of disempowerment that people don't understand how this works. They don't realise the information that they're putting in, the way that it feeds back to them. I think the other thing is to realise this actually has real-world effects. We saw this week with Martin Lewis taking legal action against Facebook. You know, targeted adverts, targeted at vulnerable groups, have consequences on people's lives. People have lost an awful lot of money through the kind of processes that this involves. So the second blind spot we say is around data. All our research was done before the Cambridge Analytica scandal, but you can see people did not know that their friends were sharing information about them. So 83% of people don't realise that information is collected about them through what other people share. And it's really detrimental to people's trust, because at the same time, 94% of people said it's really important to them to know that how their data is used, and they clearly don't understand that. Third blind spot is around pricing. 47% of people have not noticed that prices can vary when they search for them online. And only 21% of people realise that data is collected to determine the prices that they see. And again, particularly for vulnerable people, for people on lower incomes, it's quite simply not fair. And there are things that people can do, and if they don't know that this happens, they're obviously not going to do that. Fourth point is around filter bubbles. So almost 2/3 of people don't realise news and information that they see online is determined by the people that they're in social networks in, or by personalised search, and also quite low levels of trust in the content that people receive online. And I think when you're having conversations about how do we strengthen democracy in an information age, the fact that people don't realise this is the way the game works makes it really hard to move that conversation forward. And then the final blind spot was around business models. That was just so beautifully illustrated in the Senate hearings when the senator asked Mark Zuckerberg, how do you make money? And there was this sort of nasty little smirk on his face, like, well, we sell ads. But actually, people don't know that. The free-to-use model means that people aren't aware of how tech companies make money. They're rather more aware of advertising as a model than other things, but they certainly aren't aware that their data is being used as a revenue flow. And I pick out this stat because I say, if you change the word from data at the bottom and change that to be from you, then how do you feel about that? Because that's essentially the trade-off that's happening. but it's not being made explicit, and so people can't understand it. So on that sort of broader societal, those big understanding gaps, that's where we feel that there's a real need to address those on a kind of broader level than just an individual sort of learning. And I think one thing I would stress throughout all this, we're highlighting low levels of understanding the public. That is not the public's fault. We do not blame the public for this. And we don't say it's all up to you to go and educate yourselves. Yes, there are things you can do. It would be great if people had better education about those. It would be better if those resources were gathered in one place in plain English, that people could actually understand them. But ultimately, we think that this is incumbent on the industry and the people who make the products and services that people are relying on. They must make those products and services understandable. So much for understanding. Attitudes. So, like I said, this was very much about understanding sort of what people feel, so that we can sort of start to build and shape that digital society in line with that. And the thing that came really strongly through in this research is this ambivalence. People love the internet. The internet is great. It's convenient, it's fun, it's entertaining, you learn lots, and you get a lot out of it at an individual level. People are not seeing those same benefits for society as a whole. And those things happen at the same time. And there's not a contradiction in that. You can love technology and still be concerned about the consequences that you see in society. And we asked some very specific questions where we offered trade-offs. What about if poorer families got free one-day delivery, but local shops closed down as a result? People found that unacceptable. Even when we said, what if your council tax was lowered because services were put online, but some people in your community would be unable to access those? People found those unacceptable. So people want the benefits of technology, but not at any price. And I chose this quote from one of the focus group conversations because I think it really encapsulates a lot of the things that came through in the research. So we want to use those sites. They're great. These products are brilliant, but they take too much of our information. They're very invasive, and we just have to tick the box to be able to get them. So there's a sort of disempowerment, and that came through particularly strongly in the question of terms and conditions. So I would say this is underreporting, because I don't for a minute believe that many people read them at all. But those prepared to admit that they don't read or understand terms and conditions. But for me, the standout one is that 43%. There's no point reading them because companies do what they want anyway. And so that's a really sort of pernicious thing for the industry, that people feel disempowered to that extent. And coming out of that, there's a real appetite for accountability from tech companies, and particularly seeing government take a role in that. So what do we do with all this? One of the sort of driving forces in the way that we work at Doteveryone is that we think about a systems approach. It's not one part of society who has to sort this all out, all of us. So it's incumbent on government to create regulation, but very much on business to have standards for understandability, and also to create a cultural change, to use people power to drive a cultural change which shows that this is important. So those are the things that we'll be working on at Doteveryone in the coming months. We're going to hear a bit more about what other people are working on, but I would just reiterate what Rachel said. This is the beginning of a conversation. All the data that we gathered is available, it's open. Find the link, dig into it, tell us what you find, tell us what we've missed, and hopefully we can do this all again next year, but it won't be nearly as much hard work for us. Thank you.